So, welcome to our podcast, Laredo. It is a podcast about gaining insights into the historical and cultural aspects of Laredo from the perspective of the postcard collection of our special guest. And we're also hopefully going to talk about some takeaways for future generations. I am one of your co hosts, Antonio Alvarado, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you the other co host, Fernando Montemayor. Fernando, do you want to say hello to our audience?
I'm glad to be here and excited to interview Armengol.
Thank you. And needless to say, without our special guest, our podcast would not be of any great benefit because our special guest is sharing with us the postcard collection that is the basis of allowing us to bridge the past to the present and into the future. And his name is Armengol Guerra III. He is the president, CEO of Laredo Hardware Company. It is an institution in Laredo, and it is one of the economic pioneers, if you will, of export-import trade. It was founded by his dad, Armengol Guerra Jr., and the Guerra family is a pioneer family in Laredo, and they are very well known and have been responsible for many of the improvements in our economic, our cultural, political, and just society at large. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Armengol Guerra III. We're going to allow him to talk about himself, but particularly his collection. So let me introduce to you our special guest, Armengol Guerra III. Armengol, do you want to greet our audience?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony and Fernando, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here today to speak and to tell you a little bit about a hobby that I've had for over 40 years, started in the late 70s probably. And this is my postcard collection of Laredo, Texas, and Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, Mexico. I guess I should start by saying, why did I start and where did I start collecting? This was back probably in the late 70s. And at that time, I also, and I still am a collector of the postage stamps of Mexico. So I found an advertisement in Lynn's Stamp News, which at that time was the Bible of stamps. But they also had a little bit about postcards. And that's where I saw an ad for a monthly publication. And the name of it was Postcard Collector. At that time, if you wanted to collect postcards, you had to rely on postcard dealers. So I subscribed to this publication, Postcard Collector, and there I found many persons who were advertising that they had postcards to please send them a letter and ask for the area that you were interested in. So I did. One of the names that comes up, and she might still be around, was Mary L. Martin. Of course, I think everything has changed now. I don't think there's that many ads from postcard dealers. I think most of the dealers sell on eBay today. So it has changed radically because from a time where I used to write letters to these dealers, now the collecting is done mostly through eBay, services similar to eBay where items are put up for sale by bidding, and these cards go to the highest bidder. So getting back to the postcard collector, the way that you received postcards, you would, of course, ask for a specific topic or area of the country. And mine was Laredo, Texas, and Nuevo Laredo. They would then either send me a selection of cards or they would make copies of the cards and send them with a price on each card. At that point, I would pick out several. I would tell them and send them a check for those cards. If they thought that they were dealing with a person that was honest, and I'd say that most postcard collectors are honest, but who knows? They would send these on approval. Also, I would pick out the cards that I wanted, write out a check, send back the cards that I didn't want, and that was the end of that deal. And then we go on to the next one. That lasted from about, I'd say, from when I started collecting the late 70s to about 1990, 1988, 1990. I think that's when eBay came into the forefront for collectors. At that point, I started seeing offers of specific cards. There was a lot of cards from Laredo that were being put on the board, and anybody who is interested can go into eBay now, put right in postcards of Laredo, Texas, and instantly you'll get about 500 or maybe even more than that. So you make your choice, you decide how much you would like to bid on it. Normally, the way that I bid is I wait until the last minute. The last minute is when I put my bid in, because if I'm going to be trying to outbid somebody or somebody's going to be trying to outbid me, the price is going to go skyrocket. So I wait until there's about 8 seconds to go. And then, of course, I've got everything ready. And at 8 or 7 seconds, I put my bid in. And normally I'll bid it high enough to give myself a little space. And I am successful at, I'd say 80 or 85% of the time. And that's how it's done today.
Well, Armengol, thank you for sharing how you got started collecting these postcards, and obviously what sparked your interest in collecting postcards. But tell us a little bit about when you, and maybe there wasn't a point in time when it happened, and maybe it just over a period of months or years it happened. But when did you realize that you were a serious collector, a hobbyist? Did that happen overnight? Is it something that occurred just without even thinking about it? How did you transition to being the serious collector that you are today?
Well, I'm not sure when it happened, but there's several points in time that I recall. Of course, I would get these cards and I would put them into books. I would like to show you just some of the ones that are available. This is a specialized album for postcards. All of these are.
Can you hold it a little bit higher?
Yes.
And in between you and there you go. And Fernando. Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is one of them. It says postcards here, specific for postcards. And the album does not have to be specific for postcards. Here's another one that says photos, but I have postcards in this album from Laredo and Laredo.
That's just like a regular photo album.
Yes.
And so you started collecting, and how did you figure out, if you will, how to finance your investment? You told us your strategy in terms of your bidding when eBay became a resource for collecting. But up to that time, back in the 70s, did you allocate a certain amount of money per month, or it was just spur of the moment? How did you leverage what you were going to be paying and investing without, at that time, knowing that, in fact, you were going to have a pretty impressive collection?
Well, of course, nobody knows, but at a certain point in time, I started collecting them. I probably the first couple of years, a lot of the postcards were not very rare. They were postcards that came up or I received offers very often. But as time went on, I noticed that there were some cards that were a lot rarer, and those are the ones that that I started to go after. One of the times where I started feeling that this was something really rewarding for me is when I worked with Jerry Thompson on his book of Laredo. He has that book, which goes back to the 1880s, 1890s. And he came over and he selected about 5 or 6 or 7 of my postcards. And that's when I started to feel that it was very exciting to get the jewels of the postcard offerings of Laredo.
And
How did
so
you
at that point, Armengol, you started to organize and use the word curate your collection. How were you able to organize it? Did you start using these albums, or did you just have them in a big box, or how did you figure out what you had? How did you catalog them, in other words?
Oh, I just started to put them in albums, and I have albums for Laredo, Texas, and I have albums for Nuevo Laredo. I don't have them in any particular order, but I know where they are if I need it. If I need to bring out a few, for example, of downtown Laredo, they are there, very easily accessible. So that is really there's it's not very hard to do.
So
Excellent.
do you collect cards that are just from Laredo, or?
Well, no. I collect cards from areas that I've been to, especially when I was growing up. For example, my father used to take me to Monterrey often, maybe several times a year. He used to visit customers in Monterrey, and I'm talking at a time when I was 8 or 9 years old, 10 years old. And Monterrey, Nuevo León, to me, is a place that was always very impressive. I mean, it's incredible to go into a house and see a turret mill running, to see steel being ground down. They had all these machines in houses. So it was very impressive to me to see that. You know, they were people that were very active and trying to do things that they could come up with money, things that they could sell. So Monterrey has always been big for me. And even back in the 80s and 90s, I still visited Monterrey. And I used to take my sons with us. We used to go to La Cola del Caballo, a lot of tourist attractions in Monterrey, and out of the way attractions. So I also have a collection of postcards from Monterrey.
And I think to follow up with what Fernando just asked, and this is something that he and I were talking about before we started our podcast today, going back to something you said just a couple of minutes ago, is at some point you acquired the self-confidence and experience to know which postcards were rare, which ones you understood there was a certain value to them. Is this as a result of studying or having a network of collectors? Is reading articles? How did you acquire the knowledge and expertise that gave you the confidence to know, hey, I am investing seriously and I'm not just throwing my money away?
Well, it's really, you know, if you go into, I mean, if I go into eBay, I've been looking for cards for the last 30 or 40 years. All of a sudden I see a card that I had never seen before. And right away, I know that it's a rare card. So I think it's just a matter of being in this hobby that gives you the second impressions as to what is a collectible card and what isn't. There's a lot of cards, especially from the 20s, teens, 20s and 30s, that we could almost say they're one of a kind. Now, are they worth what they want for them? that is, I've always said it's something between the seller and the buyer, because it might be worth something to me, but to somebody else, it might not be worth anything. So, the price will depend on what I am willing to pay to the person that is auctioning that card.
Yeah. And
But
one of the things Fernando and I talked about, again, in preparation for today's podcast, a question that we wanted to ask you is, I recall from our previous conversations, Armengol, that you actually are very passionate about your collection. You invest your time and effort because it's something that brings you a lot of satisfaction. And you don't necessarily do it because you're trying to amass a fortune in postcards and trying to sell them and trying to flip them. Is that still true going into the future? Is that what you expect will happen, that you will keep this collection intact, or are you planning to sell it at some point in the future?
I'm not planning to sell it, but if Fernando makes me an offer, maybe I will. But honestly, I'm not trying to. I'm not collecting them because I hope to see a monetary gain. I'm collecting them because it's something that really interests me and something that moves me when I see a card that I had never seen before of downtown Laredo, of our trolley system. There's a lot of them, that a lot of the cards that I really, I don't know, they make me want to possess them, but not for resale. I'm not doing it to sell them. Probably when I'm done, or when I'm gone, somebody may take everything and just give them away, throw them out. Maybe they'll give them to Fernando. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what makes you so unique, Armengol, and I guess in the world of hobbyists and people who are serious collectors, and that's the reason we do this podcast, is to learn ourselves and figure out what motivates people to do it. And we are so impressed, and we congratulate you for that. And I think because of that, you're able to dovetail. And now we're going to get into specific postcards that we're going to show on the screen and you can talk about. But it is about the historical and cultural aspects of these postcards. And we know that you have exhibited them and shared your enthusiasm and the insights with others. So before we look at specific postcards, tell us about the exhibits that you have done in the past in which you have shown these postcards to others in the community and how that was received.
Well, there's two places where I have exhibited them at the request of the persons that run the Archivo Histórico in Nuevo Laredo. They knew, and if you remember Dr. Manuel Ceballos, he was in charge of at that time, he was, this is Jose Maria Ceballos' brother. He was in charge of the Archivo Histórico back about 6 or 7 years ago. And we mounted an exhibit there of postcards. And in effect, what happens is they take the images, they make copies of them. So what I practically did is I gave them the rights to exhibit those. But I felt that it was a place where people would see them, enjoy them, remember, and I'm happy that I did it. And like I said, I'm not in it to make a profit. I'm in it to enjoy it, and I want other people to also have the opportunity to see these postcards. In Laredo, Texas, of course, the Webb County Heritage Foundation, we put up about 30 or 35 postcards. And when I say postcards, you know the size of a postcard, maybe 4x6. Well, in both of these exhibits, they were blown up. They were blown up to maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. In other words, a size where somebody who was going to be viewing them could really appreciate them. Because you can look at a postcard and sometimes you don't really see all of the aspects, but when they're blown up, to a bigger size, those can really be a powerful photograph or powerful scene that they have seen before, but not 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Right. Well, with that introduction, let's get into some of these individual postcards, and we're going to be sharing our screen PowerPoint. And let's go with the first one and tell us a little bit about what this one is all about.
Okay. Well, it says, you're looking at it, International Bridge, Laredo, Texas. That's the actual International Bridge, circa 1905. That's what it looked like. You wanted to go into Laredo, you were going to go through this structure. It looks like they're sending messages across to the other side. This is a 2-horse buggy. Maybe they want to make sure nobody else is coming from Nuevo Laredo in another buggy. So this was what they had to do at that time. They're both looking across. The driver is stopped, and he's probably waiting to get the person that's in charge there to tell him that he can go ahead and cross. And that's the way they were crossed. Now, there's no problem with the pedestrian traffic. You can see on the left and on the right, there is a space for people to walk. Also,
there's a pedestrian way for coming and going.
Mm-hmm. And then and a lot of people, maybe they would drive across on their horse or come across to the U.S. side on their horse. And this is 1905. This is what Laredo, and that's why maybe a lot of places Laredo has had the aspect, or people would think of Laredo as a sleepy town because everything was slow and easy. This is the way Laredo and Nuevo Laredo were at that time. But this is an incredible card. It's a very rare card. I do have 2 of them, just because sometime or other I just happened to run across another one, and I went ahead and bought it because I like this card so much.
Yeah, and I noticed that the bridge appears to be made of metal and not just wood.
Right.
The bracing.
Part of the structure is metal. All of the structure that's it's steel, but not the kind of steel that is seen today when they put up a structure like this. But it was for that time. It was a very well-built bridge.
Can you tell
go ahead, Fernando.
Picture? Yeah. Can you tell from the picture where this bridge was located?
In the same place that the current bridge is located. The very same place, coming down Convent Avenue and going into Mexico.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting that today, obviously, with our times, you would think that there would be a lot of structures for import, export, customs, immigration. These facilities, at least from this postcard, either are very modest or they're maybe off to a side, but there is not a huge structure as you would expect today when you have an international bridge.
Very different. At that time, you didn't need in the first place, if you were bringing something across, you didn't need to present it to customs if it was personal. If you were a big importer, that was something else. You had to present documents. But people that were coming to purchase something in Laredo or were taking something to Mexico or coming from Mexico, if you were driving a little buggy like this, all you did was stop, and the inspector, if there was one available, they would check it and let you go.
If there was a business trying to bring in merchandise from Mexico or export from U.S. to Mexico, would they have to use this bridge, or is there other ways that they could get this merchandise across, barges, for example?
I don't think so. I think this was actually the way. Or no, there was one other way: the railroad.
The railroad.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go to our next postcard and see what that tells us. Another bridge. This is called the Footbridge.
Well, it's the same bridge. It's actually the same bridge. And this postcard, I think I dated it about 1914 because of the car that's there, and it's basically the same structure. They may have made it a little bit bigger by that time, but it's basically the same structure. You can see that there's some soldiers from Fort McIntosh. They were actually given the duty to oversee people that were coming in from Mexico, just to check them out, to make sure that there was nobody coming over with rifles and guns into the United States side. And so they were on duty. And a lot of these people were from all over the United States. They actually really liked to be a part of that service, being on guards.
And what's interesting is 1914, you now have automobiles. In the 1905 postcard, we had a buggy with two mules. And I noticed that on the bridge, there's a sign, and my vision isn't what it used to be, but I can tell it says something about mules and horses.
Right.
I'm not sure what that top line says, but
It's walk with your horse. In other words, they don't want anybody riding the horse. So
okay.
they want them to go across, but they have to walk, and the horses to one side.
Yeah. And do you recall where you got this postcard? How you found it?
Honestly, I don't. I'm not sure where I got it, but one time I bought a lot of postcards. There was about 50 or 60 postcards from Fort McIntosh. It might have been one of those cards.
Okay.
This is the. Go ahead. This is the card, and I think we've discussed it, that somebody sent a copy or sent this card to their family or a friend, and they mentioned an incident, and that happened here. I don't know if it's true or was true. We can't tell, but apparently he was very impressed. And I'd like to, if you'll permit me, I'd like to read what it says, because we look at the postcard. There's also sometimes a story, or there's writing in the back. Now, a lot of these cards were bought by soldiers as keepsakes or as souvenirs of Laredo, Texas. So this is what the person who bought this card, and it wasn't sent over the mails, but it's one of the cards that is really, really interesting. It says, "This is the gateway into Mexico. See the American soldiers. They are guarding the traffic to see that no goods or soldiers or other undesirable things cross. Probably I shall have this task someday." So he was looking forward to that. "It must be interesting for all the boys who want to get on that post when put on guard duty. One night, one of the boys in my company shot a wooden-legged Mexican trying to get across with some mezcal, probably mezcal, but they called it mezcal, a Mexican liquor made from cactus." So I'm sure that it's mezcal. "He is a timid little boy like myself. Probably that is why he shot instead of buying the mezcal. Luckily for the Mexican, the shot struck his wooden leg." So, this is incredible. Like I said, it's almost hard to believe, but I guess it did happen if he was that impressed.
Yeah. And I think, Armengol, that's exactly why we selected you as our guest, because yes, you are a serious collector, but you really love the culture and history of this part of the world. And you're going beyond just the front of the postcard, which has the photo or the graphic. You actually were into reading the message that was written, and putting the story together. And it really makes this postcard come alive. It's like we had a video, we can visualize what you just read.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that is totally exciting when you get something like this. I have several of them, not as specific and not as detailed as this one, but there are others that have something that are of interest.
Great. Well, let's move on to the next postcard.
Okay, we've seen two postcards of the bridge, and this is another. You can tell by the cars, this is sometime around 1930 to 32. And what's unusual or what calls attention is what is written on the postcard itself here. The person that took the photo says over 500 tourist cars returning in one day from Mexico. International Footbridge, Laredo, Texas. 500 cars at that time was totally surprising to everybody. Right now, we probably cross 500 in a couple of minutes. But at that time, there was 500 cars. Somebody counted them, I guess, but there was 500 cars, and they were aghast that this many cars were coming into Laredo. And one of the reasons that we have this, there was an article, and they mentioned that what is happening now, of course, now we have one bridge that is dedicated to commercial traffic. And there was a story in MSN, and I look at MSN almost on a daily basis. I don't receive the only newspaper that I receive is Laredo Times, but I get a lot of my information from this service. But they did have a story on what was happening in international trade in Laredo, Texas. And in this story, they actually quote Dennis Nixon, the president or CEO of International Bank of Commerce. But what they say here, that now they have a FAST, what is called a FAST program. And it says it acts as a sort of TSA pre-check for the bridge's most frequent truck travelers, which comes to about 20,000 daily. So now we have, we move from 1932 to 2024, almost 100 years later. And something almost unimaginable has happened. I would say that this is something that has really put Laredo on the world map. It says here that the customs checkpoint that trucks pass, it takes 27 seconds to pass a truck through customs now. Of course, they check them very thoroughly.
Yeah, what's amazing is I had heard that Laredo was the largest inland port in the United States, just by the sheer amount of merchandise and traffic that crosses this international border. And I can tell from the data that you just shared with us why that is the case.
Well, it's not only the largest inland port, it's the largest port in the United States. I mean, you take the port of Los Angeles, you take the port of New York, Laredo is receiving more international freight, more international goods than any other port. And then that, I guess it's actually scary, that it's gotten to this point.
Wow. Well, and this is the question that Fernando asked last time, so I will ask it again. I was waiting for him to pop the question, but I'm assuming this bridge replaces the bridges that we saw in the previous postcards. In other words, it's the one that comes off Convent Street and goes into, what is it, Guerrero on the Mexican side?
That is correct. Yes, exactly right. Exactly where what we call the old bridge is located today. That is where this bridge is located.
And as we're looking into Mexico, all of a sudden I noticed the spire. So that must be the Catholic Church. by the plaza.
Santo Niño.
And then I guess there's a sign, looks like a
beer
neon
sign.
sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beer sign.
Yes, I don't know if it's Carta Blanca or but it's
Corona.
Corona. Could be Corona. And
Yeah. No, it's really amazing.
some
All
things
right.
don't change.
Yeah. So we go to the next postcard.
Okay. Well, this is something that we have discussed before, but not in the program. The trolley system in Laredo, Texas. This made Laredo very unique. It was the first town or city west of the Mississippi that had a trolley system. And this ran through the downtown Laredo. It went into the Heights. It went into from Santa Maria Avenue. It went north. It was a way that people got around in Laredo. I mean, most people didn't have access to a car. There were a lot of bicycles, but this was the way that people went to downtown Laredo. This was the way they went to work. And this was a very viable and unique mode of transportation that was enjoyed by everybody at that time. The electric trolley system. And we had one of the best trolley systems. And unfortunately, we don't have it anymore. And there's a story to that. And, maybe one of these days, I'm sure that a lot of people have heard it, of how they came and the big Detroit companies bought out the system and replaced them with gas guzzlers, with buses.
It is really significant what you just said, Armengol, that Laredo was the first city west of the Mississippi that had a trolley car system serving pretty much the entire city. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, what we had, it went into the Heights area, and it also went into north it went along Santa Maria, probably to further than where Christian School is now, and then back.
Yeah, and pretty much that was Laredo back in
Yes.
this day and age in 1918 or thereabouts. And
Mhm.
Laredo has a lot of firsts. I mean, we've already heard that it is the largest port. We've heard
Right.
that it was the first city west of the Mississippi that had this trolley system. And I guess if we fast forward it, I'll share this with you, but Laredo was the first city in the United States that had underground TV cable, and it was done by Viewmore Company, and it was George Spence, who was the owner of Laredo Theaters. And interestingly enough, right across the trolley that we're seeing there was the old Tivoli Theater, and that's that arch that's right there. Eventually,
At that time, it was
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
Strand. At that time, it was the Strand Theater.
right. And did they perform operas and plays, or was it a movie house?
No, it was a movie house.
Okay. Well, needless to say, that was the forerunner of what became Laredo Theaters. And Mr. Spence brought Viewmore, if you remember, back in the 60s, late 50s, into Laredo, and people didn't know what this was all about. And cable became the rage. And it's only now that people are cutting the cable and moving on to streaming. But the history and culture that some of these postcards allow us to discuss is unbelievable.
What was the population of Laredo at that time? Do you know?
1920. I would imagine it was about 20,000.
And I wonder how
25,000.
we ended up with a trolley.
Well, it's an interesting story, and there was a group of people that got together, and they made an investment. They decided that it was something good for Laredo. They made an investment, and they made application. They were given the green light to put in the trolley there. I have the whole story, and one of these days show it to you. But these people persons that were forward looking and they wanted to do something. I mean, and they didn't do it because of the goodness of their hearts. They charged 5 cents for each of the people that boarded the trolley. But I imagine that with that 5 cents each, they were able to pay off the amount that they owed, and maybe something was left for them.
So this was privately owned.
Yeah, it was called. I don't know exactly what it was called, but it was a group of people. They had a name for this
Company?
Company. I don't have it with. I have it, but I don't have it with me.
Yeah.
But it was a they formed this company, and it was something that benefited the citizens of Laredo.
So private citizens took a private venture.
Yes.
So before we leave this postcard, the building on the left was the municipal city hall building, as I recall, when we were in school in Laredo. That's Fernando, Armengol, and I. What was it in 1918? Was it a municipal government building?
Yes, the same that we knew it were the city offices were there in 1918. The mayor's office, all of the people who were part of the group that moved Laredo were there.
And if we look right, it looks like it's part of the same building, but it's not because we don't have the perspective. But from the tip of a very impressive looking building. And before we started the podcast, we were previewing these postcards, and Fernando identified it as the original Laredo National Bank building. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was the Laredo National Bank.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a look at the next postcard and see what it brings our way.
Okay, this is a partially colorized postcard. This is from an earlier time. The post office, the federal post office there, I think was finished at around 1910. So I would say that this is either 1910 or 1911 when this picture was taken. And of course, across from the federal building is still the park that is there, the plaza. But you can see the rails are turning. They're coming from Matamoros, and it's gonna be turning into Salinas or vice versa. It's going downtown. It's gonna go a block. Then it's gonna go to the left on Farragut, and it's going to Flores Avenue south. On Flores Avenue, it's going to go past the city offices there that we just saw in the previous slide, and then it's going to go around, and that one is going to head to Iturbide, or I'm sorry, it's going to go down and go on Market. It's going to follow Market, left of Market, and go to the Heights.
And the park across the street, is that Jarvis Plaza? Is that where Jarvis Plaza is today?
Yes, that's Jarvis Plaza at that time.
And back in 1910, 1911, was the Hamilton Hotel or the Saintsmore building constructed, or would you know?
The Hamilton Hotel was there, but not in the form that we all know. And the Saintsmore building was not there.
Okay.
There was I think there was an auto parts store, a store that sold auto parts. I do have another postcard that shows what was there before the Saintsmore building. I don't have it here, but maybe it's for another showing.
Right. All right. So let's move on to the next postcard. And this is across the street from the government building that we just saw, right?
Right. It's right in front of where the post office was and still is today. But at that time, it was still a federal building. And these are the soldiers coming from the direction of Fort McIntosh. They are and it says February 22nd, 1917. So I think anybody that's over maybe 50 or 60 years old remembers that the Washington's birthday celebration and parade was always on February the 22nd. Didn't matter what day it was. It might have been Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. On February 22nd, Washington's birthday, we had the parade. And this is the Army. This is the cavalry that was stationed at Fort McIntosh. They're passing in review, and they're going to basically go left, and they're going to follow more or less the tracks of the trolley, and they're going to pass in review in front of the city offices that we saw previously.
Yeah.
City
And what
Hall.
about that building in the back there? What is that?
That's where you were born, Tony.
That's where all of us were born, right?
Oh,
That's
Yeah.
that's the Mercy Hospital, isn't it?
that's the Mercy Hospital at 1917.
Yeah, unbelievable.
It's a lot of one of these the exciting things about some of these postcards is everything that's going on. You see the onlookers there, much the same way that when the Washington's birthday celebration comes about. Maybe they used to take us when we were small, when we were 3 or 4 years old, and it was an incredible scene. Then we took our children, and now we take our grandchildren to see it. And it's very similar.
It's a tradition that continues, and it's ironic because this is a border town between Mexico and the United States, and it celebrates George Washington. In my recollection, if I recall our history teachers at St. Joseph's Academy, I don't think George Washington ever made a visit to Laredo.
I don't think so.
All right. So who are these guys?
Well, this is a photo from Fort McIntosh. Fort McIntosh was here for, after the Mexican-American War, which is called La Intervención Americana in Mexico. There were soldiers, there were boys from all over the United States that were stationed here. They came from a lot of states, not in Texas, but they came from some of them from Texas. So it doesn't say where this Company G, 19th U.S. Infantry. I don't know where they're from. I'm sure we could get information and we could find out where they were from, but they came from all over the United States. But this was a little bit earlier than other cards that I have. This was probably 1907, 1908. And I'm looking at their uniforms, and these are not the standard uniforms that were used after 1914, 1915. So that's why I date it to about 1908.
Do you know what that building is in the back?
Well, that's probably the main headquarters there, and it's there it was there at Fort McIntosh.
So for those of us that are younger than you,
Yes.
can you tell us where Fort McIntosh was?
Well, of course, Fort McIntosh is where Laredo College is located this day, where it was ceded to Laredo from the U.S. government in 1946. And that's where they started Laredo Junior College at that time. And now it's named Laredo College in West Laredo.
Yeah, and I think it was also where Laredo State University began as a 2-year advanced institution, and then that morphed into Texas A&M International, which is now obviously over by the old Air Force Base. But Armengol, Fernando and I were commenting that some of these young men look awfully young. And that's why it goes back to that postcard that you were reading when you were relaying the story about the individual who was shot in the leg by a soldier, and he referred to himself as boys. And these are boys. I mean, they look very young.
Right. That's right. Some of them may be 17 years old, 18 years old. Some of them may have lied. They're 16 and they were let into the Army because of a situation back home. They needed to get out. So yes, they look very young. And that's that's what they were looking for people that they could train to be good soldiers.
And it's interesting what you said about the uniforms. Boy, that's a lot of insight that you shared with us, how you could tell it was earlier than, 1915, because these uniforms appeared to be made of wool. And if they were coming from anywhere outside of Texas, coming from somewhere else north of the in the United States, they obviously got a lesson in how hot it was going to be if you had wool uniforms, especially these appeared to be almost dress uniforms. I mean, you're going to go into battle, that's not going to be very functional.
Yes, the heat probably was a factor here, and they may have just put on those uniforms for that photo and then gone back to the barracks and got into their fatigues or whatever it is that they wore to train.
Yeah, because they're wearing gloves, so obviously it wasn't.
Yeah, obviously. Well, I now take you to this postcard, which is very interesting because it doesn't have soldiers in it, and but it does appear to be some sort of parade. Is this float in the parade?
Right, it's a float in the parade, and of course it says here Carro del Centro Social Fronterizo. So obviously it was a social club. There was probably several. If you recall that building that was in front of the old Webb County courthouse that was torn down, that might have been, it was called, I don't know what it was called, but that was also a building that was made by people who wanted to socialize, and they were Hispanic. Most of them were from either Mexico, first generation or second generation. So this was a float, and you could tell by the dresses that the ladies are wearing, they almost are in the era of the flappers. So we're talking about 1924, 1925.
Yeah, pretty exciting. And so this is the last of the postcards that I have on the PowerPoint, but you might want to share any postcards that you brought with you, and we can talk about them, or we can move on to another topic.
Well, I think, the way that you're presenting the postcards here, I don't think we could really present them in that manner. So I think we'll save them for another day when we can do the same. In other words, put them up, like I'll scan them and then send them, and I think that would serve us better.
Right. We'll upload them, and we can use the digital revolution that has taken place. And I think I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, co-host Fernando, because he's got the digital conversation that he wants to engage in. So, Fernando, take it away.
I guess one of the questions that we had asked, we wanted to find out is, how can you tell if the postcard that you've gotten is an original or it's a digital copy?
Well, I mean, that's pretty easy to tell. As a matter of fact, now they sell, if you're interested in digital copies, now they actually sell a lot of postcards, and they'll put there that it's a digital copy. Why? Because it's very easy to tell when it's, you can tell how the back of the postcard is, how the front, you can tell which is the real thing and which is a copy just by looking at it. But there are people right now, there's about 10 different cards that are on eBay. They're digital copies, and they're saying they're digital copies. Why? Because if they sell it as an original, whoever buys it is going to send it back. So it is very easy to tell, the way that it's constructed, the way that the back of the card, the front, it is very easy to tell.
Knowing what you know now today, if you were starting your collection today with all the knowledge that you've already attained, what would you have done differently, or what would you do differently?
I don't know that I'd do anything differently, but I would probably still have that core desire to know what was going on in the 1920s, what was going on, what what buildings were there, why did they tear them down. Laredo has done a very poor job of trying to conserve the past. And, I'm doing it with postcards, but it can also be done with buildings. It can be done with a lot of other items that are still out there, but nobody cares. Everybody just cares about getting their money and going home at 5 o'clock, resting, and go back to work the next day. That, in Laredo, that seems to be it. There's other cities, Houston and San Antonio, that put committees together to make sure that buildings are not knocked down, to make sure that history is preserved. Laredo doesn't have anything. They're not interested in that. And, I don't want to get too much into politics, so I'll shut up.
If we were to ask you what takeaways to leave for our audience, for listeners, and that would include not only people of our age and friends and neighbors, but also people of your children's age, and hopefully, thanks to the power of the digital media, maybe our grandkids might get to see or experience some of what you have shared with us about the historical and cultural aspects of Laredo. What takeaways, kind of in summary, would you like to leave them with? What is your message as a result of your postcard collection, what you've learned and why you continue to be so excited about it?
Well, I mean, it's very hard for me or for somebody to try to gauge the interest of a young person and try to steer them into collecting something. This has to come from within. And, if they show some interest, I'd be happy to show them whatever I have. But not everybody is a collector. Not everybody is a historian. Not everybody wants to know about what was there 50, 60, 70 years ago. So, to me, I don't want to be a pessimist, but it has to come from within. And I'm sure there's going to be people there that are going to want to do this, but they're going to have to decide for themselves. I'll be around if somebody wants to learn something about it. But, that's something that, nobody told me anything about these postcards when I started. There was nobody to really make me enthusiastic about it. So it has to come from each person has to decide what he wants to do with something like this.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. Fernando, any concluding remarks?
No, I think it's been a real interesting podcast. Thank you, Armengol.
You're quite welcome. I enjoyed being here with you. It's not often that you get to tell other people about something that you've been doing for 30, 40, 50 years just because you like to do it. But thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Armengol. And in closing, let me just say that Fernando and I are very grateful to you, Armengol, as a colleague, as a friend, as a neighbor, but more importantly, as a guest. We applaud what you have done. We know it hasn't come easy. We know that it is an ongoing endeavor. And for Fernando and I, we got the idea for this podcast, not because we thought anybody would get listen to it, because we didn't and we don't know that. And for all that matter, we didn't know that we were going to get somebody of your caliber, Armengol, as our guest. But what we're hoping to do is to start this conversation about those of us who were either born or raised in Laredo and love Laredo and still have family there, about how to remember Laredo and how to give back to Laredo. And perhaps maybe this podcast and others that are out there will have a vision for a brighter future in Laredo for the next generation of Laredoans. Because as you so well put it, Armengol, it has to come from within. It has to come from the individual, not as an assignment, not because you're told to do it. But if it can help you fulfill your dreams, it is well worth it to look at the past, connected to the present to lead you to a better future. So that's my sermon for today, and we will close on that note. So thank you. And Fernando, it's been great working with you on developing this podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I really want to thank you and Fernando. It was very, very enjoyable. And who knows, maybe we can do it again.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Fernando.